Diana Vreeland was not a great beauty, that she was not a classic beauty. And that period, beauty was such currency for women. What is your thinking about what she might have become had she been a classic beauty? Would she have been able to do all that she did?
That's an interesting question. It's a very good question. I think there was such determination and curiosity and passion that it was so much more important to her than the idea of, she saw beauty in so many different things, and where it wasn't classical beauty, it was every kind of beauty. And I think that's also what pushed her forward, her career forward, and also just she never stopped. And that's the way that I see it. And this is, I never knew Diana Vreeland. And, just to let you all know that this was really a discovery of, I married Alexander, her grandson, and I worked in fashion at the time, and I was curious. I was like, who is this woman? Of course, I had heard about her. I never, and this was my discovery of her. And it was fascinating because I discovered this hard-working, determined person who had this so positive, and and I think she was just always looking for something different. She wasn't trying to define herself. She was always trying to give to us to see things, and it's something that was important for me to see, and it also gave me the ability. All of a sudden, I was literally working in fashion, and all of a sudden I became a filmmaker after making this movie. So she also gave something to me. She pushed something in me that made me understand and gave me the belief that I could really create things. And so that's why I think if she was a beautiful woman, I think she was born with this inside. But I'd like to give it also to Alexander because he knew her and he may answer this question differently.
And just to add to the question, to make it more complicated for you, do you think she was working from a place of insecurity or certainty?
I think that if beauty had been, her own beauty had been really important for her, she would have had plastic surgery. And it's the kind of thing at the time that was being done, and a lot of people around her were constantly, changing their look through plastic surgery. So I think the fact that she never did means it didn't really matter to her. What was the second part of the question?
Well, you've now raised another question for me, which is, she never had plastic surgery, but she was so intentional about the way that she presented herself. And it seemed that she wasn't necessarily doing it in a way where she was trying to lean into sort of classical or Western ideas of beauty. The rouging of the ears and just the hair, the jet black hair, like her entire life. So I wondered if that second part of the question was if you thought she was working from a place of insecurity or an incredible amount of certainty.
I don't think it was a big insecurity because she grew up with money. She had money when she was first married, so it wasn't really a pursuit of money. And it always seemed really clear what she wanted to do. She didn't have a committee of friends or people she would toss ideas around with. She always had that clarity. I remember coming home from dinner with her, for example, at her apartment when she was at Vogue, and there would be light boxes, and she would have a light box and she'd lay out all the pictures that she needed to go through, and she would pick which image would be shown. There was never a discussion. She didn't talk to anybody else about it. She picked the image, and that was it. So it wasn't from that kind of, when she left Vogue, there was a lot of, under Grace Mirabella, everyone sort of was like surprised that there were like these meetings and people were talking about things, and were discussing things, and it was like, we're not used to this. And
I love what you said, that there were no meetings, there were no memo, or that she just told people what needed to happen.
Totally.
And in I was listening to sort of the chuckling in the audience when she would sort of issue these directives. And it made me wonder, we were talking about this earlier, now fashion has this real sense of democracy, right? Everyone can be part of the conversation and offer up their opinions. Everyone can be a critic on social media. I mean, is there something to be said for a time when there were these gatekeepers and when decisions were issued from on high and people said, this is fashionable and this is not?
I think there is, because there was a sense of originality first of all, she was at the creme of the creme in the fashion world because she was at Bazaar in the most important years when it was with Carmel Snow and Brodovich. And she was, she really invented the idea of the fashion editor. And as she clearly stated it. And, she gave a stylistic point of view, but it was at Vogue where she was able to unleash her, really everything about her world, how she was brought up, and absolutely everything that was hot in the world. But she also had a way of talking about everything. So this sense of democratizing things that she did as well at the Costume Institute was really important. And this was something within her. And I just feel that it was much better, but she had a sense of style. And, today everybody can comment on everything. It's a very different world. And people often say, how do you think she would have been in this world? And I really don't know. I mean, she would have probably given much better, directives and reactions to things than anybody else today. She would have had the one, as Diane von Furstenberg said, she was blogging before anybody else with those memos.
Well, you were saying that, there was a kind of authenticity to her because the way that she had money, and when someone asked her about the importance of money, and she's like, my God, of course, it's extremely important. I mean, that also seemed to, I don't know, in some ways, like, protect her from accusations of incorrectness because she was so blunt about her reality.
Yes. No, very, very much so. And she also had to work for her money, though, because because Reed, and you can correct me, it's not, she was brought up in money, but then he really was not a very big money maker. So she really was the one working, and she had to work to pay the bills. It's, when she died, it's not that she left this vast fortune. Yeah. She left beautiful memorabilia, but it wasn't, she really had to work.
Was she in some ways like the main breadwinner or no?
My sense is she wasn't I think that they were equal breadwinners for a period. And then after that, he passed away, and then she was the only breadwinner. But she had to keep working, and she sort of saw that as being what she wanted to do. But, the other thing, she always had a kind of a fantasy vision of things. And as a child, we were living in Morocco for a while, and my grandmother was convinced that we would ride horses or camels to school every day. And all the conversation was always like, did you gallop all the way to school today? And it was that was the fantasy. If you have a grandson who's going to school in Morocco, he'd be on his horse and he'd be galloping. Sometimes, maybe standing on the horse, not even sitting on the horse. But it was that kind of a fantasy on everything, which was so wonderful and enriching. And then that same fantasy became the basis of the Met exhibits, or became the basis of these photo shoots at Vogue and at Harper's Bazaar.
If it's actually fascinating. I'm sorry, but to think about the emotion that she showed always, because she never covered things up. I mean, maybe she covered up her feelings of, her love, the loss of Reed. Mm-hmm. But when we started to make the film, we had this idea that we wanted to animate her. And that very last section of the film where she goes off in the plane, we had a lot of other sections like that initially in the film. But nothing was was real enough, because when you saw her on camera and she had this kind of malleable face with these incredible expressions and one-liners. And if you think of today in the world of fashion, there's no emotion. There's absolutely no emotion that's shown by any of the people who are apparently tastemakers, style makers, this is like, she was really herself, and she showed that to us in all of the work that she did.
Well, also when she's talking about her love of work, and it was interesting where she's asked if she's a feminist, and she's sort of is a bit sort of baffled by that question, but at the same time, like, you just see her passion for the work. And not that all roads lead to The Devil Wears Prada, but this one does, because I don't know, I don't want to spoil anything for anyone who hasn't seen the sequel, but there is a moment when the Meryl Streep Miranda Priestley character really just sort of says, God, I love working. And it almost sounds like the revelation of a dirty little secret.
Yeah. I think it's actually her own secret as well. I think it's Meryl Streep's secret when she said it, because it's not only Miranda Priestley.
Yeah, it's Meryl.
It's Meryl Streep who's saying that. But no, I think she was passionate about her work, and Diana Vreeland, and you can see that she was. And look at the playing field that she had. Vogue was extraordinary during those days. They're absolutely unforgettable. And, there was a triumvirate at Harper's Bazaar, so she wasn't solely responsible for what was on those pages. But, Vogue is just, they are unforgettable, those pages. But they also had freedom. The fact is, times have changed. Advertisers, immediately took a shift the second that Mirabella went in. And it's, she could do it during those days. Now it's a very different thing.
I think that she also had an ability to transform things, which is very fascinating, because a lot of times when you sort of look at a pecking order of, like, Avis and Hertz, whatever, the chance that number 2 can become number 1 is really, really rare. It just doesn't happen. And when she was at Harper's Bazaar, it was really the number 1 fashion magazine in the world. And Vogue was going through a really sleepy period. It was more like a Town and Country, very social, very following what sort of society women were doing. And she suddenly put Vogue on the map, and they figured out how to keep it there forever and ever. And now when you sort of compare it to other magazines, it's so much in a league of its own. It's really fascinating. And the Costume Institute, even as Mr. Montebello mentioned, there was it was really a sleepy institution. It would just show sort of like, what women in Holland in the 1500s wore to bake bread or something. And you'd sort of like say, who's going to come and see that? And the answer was very, very few people. And she came along and she created it. It didn't have, like, nobody would go to it. We're that transformational quality is really fascinating.
Well, it's so fascinating how many seeds that she planted that have become the way that sort of the contemporary fashion industry. Whether it's, when we think of an incredible fashion photograph, we think about a lot of those images that she worked on when she was at Bazaar. We think about Verushka, and we think about Dovima with elephants. And and I don't know if you can answer this question, but why does it seem like so much of our sort of understanding of what makes a great fashion photograph is rooted in that time, and it's really rooted with her? And everything after seems to constantly be either trying to live up to that or sort of in tension with it.
I think there are probably many different answers to this question, and I think it's. First of all, at Bazaar, you had
Well,
Brodovich.
money. We'll throw up money.
Right. Yes, there's that. But you had Brodovich, and when you put together somebody like Diana Vreeland and Brodovich, and then you put these amazing
He was
photographers.
the creative director.
Yes. Yes, I'm sorry. Alexei Brodovich, who creative directors today look at still, Alexei Brodovich believed in white space. He's all these covers, everything that you saw basically during the Bazaar years on screen was all art directed by him. And maybe there were a couple by Henry Wolf, as maybe a couple of later ones. But, he had a way of working with Diana Vreeland and with these photographers, because now then you have to talk about these photographers, because you had Louise Dahl-Wolff, you had Mukasey, you had Hoyningen-Huene, you had then you had the introduction of Avedon, which was huge. And I think that there was budget, there was originality, the clothes were absolutely fabulous, and I think we always have to go back to freedom also, because freedom was, I think, one of the key elements. And when she went to Vogue and started to really curate, because she was now editor-in-chief, and she could also curate the look of who was a new woman, and she had the 60s, and it was a completely different face. And then there was the internationalism. So she really brought everything together. But you have to have an overall vision. And she had that. She had that sense of all of those aspects.
And I think timing has to come into this conversation. I think that her Vogue, she got what was going on, and I think in the movie there's sort of a reference of the 60s being a sort of a flashback or flash forward from the 20s, which she really understood. I think that sort of sense of what was going on, she got, and really rode that wave very effectively. And I think that, success for different companies, a lot of it is just the luck of the timing, and they just come out at the right time, and nothing can, nothing can control that or make it happen. It just sort of like, that's her moment. And
Well, her relationship with celebrities was also interesting in that some of the models that she sort of discovered eventually become celebrities, but also some of the celebrities that she put into the magazine, but she seemed to retain a kind of control over how they would appear. And I think about now when celebrities often appear on the covers of magazines.
They control it.
The celebrity's in charge of how they look, which means that they often just continue to look the way they always do, as opposed to taking the reader on, a journey, surprising them or delighting them in some surprising way. I mean, did you find that her relationship with celebrity was one of awe, or was one of sort of, this is just sort of another ingredient in my sort of interesting stew?
I mean, I since I didn't know her, but I can just tell by making the movie. I mean, it was her world. It was, it was like Warhol was her best friend and she was in these circles with absolutely everybody, and she could hold her own very well. I mean, I remember she had this fight out on Madison Avenue one night because Bob Colacello told me, because she kept saying to Andy, she said, like, why aren't you letting me into your house? You have to let me into your house. You come to my house. Why am I not coming to your house? And so, she stood up for everything. Yeah. But this was her world. And there wasn't this separation that there is now. And it's just, and as I mentioned to you before, the world was smaller. And there was like the international people who were kind of the cool people. Everybody kind of knew each other in a certain way. And she was part of it, even though there was a huge age gap also, many times. She was older, especially when she was at the Costume Institute.
Which also was fascinating because she really was a mentor to the next generation. And I think that there really was, when Manolo Blahnik, started out, he was in his 20s or 30s. And when Oscar Lorenta started out, he was in his 30s or whatever. And Carolina Herrera and Dan von Furstenberg, these were all sort of young kids who were just sort of starting in fashion. And she would see them, and she was probably 20 or 30 years older than they, and really was a mentor to them and helped them out and get them going. And so there's a lot of those kind of stories, which sometimes you don't see as much today.
Yeah. You know, it's funny because, you know, as I'm watching, of course, I kept thinking about the current director of editorial content for all of Condé Nast, Anna Wintour. And when she was the editor-in-chief of Vogue, she also did a lot of the things that Deanna Vreeland does, in that younger designers would come and she would look at their work and perhaps help them along their way. And now that is seen as a really that's sort of troubled water, and people have real issues with who is given help and who is declined help, or who is, who is welcomed into the fold and who is not. Why do you think that she was able to, and this is, I'm sure, also a reflection of who's interviewed, but it seemed like there was this just kind of understanding that if she extended a hand, that was wonderful, and you jumped at it. And if she didn't, well, then you just sort of kept quiet and you moved along and struggled however you might need to struggle.
And I wonder, because, I'm thinking of Manolo Blahnik, for instance, because he was doing set designs, and she said to him, she said, you should be doing shoes. It's clear that you should be doing shoes. And I think the way
she sees that is amazing.
I know. But she had this clarity of being able to do that. But, there are also, because, all the slew of volunteers at the Costume Institute were people who have become very important in fashion, from Simon Doonan to Tawny Goodman, right? And many more who you may remember more of them. But Andre Leontali, that's right. But she saw something in people. Okay, and she had the generosity of spirit to talk about it and to see it, and I think that is something that just was very natural to her, and it gave, I remember Manolo's first show, and people the heels actually didn't stay. It was an Ozzie Clark show, and they broke. All the shoes broke. Okay, and so he obviously completely has changed, but it was just like a complete failure. But he went and he started doing it. But I think the fact that she gave this to so many people, because that's the one thing that people have always said. They said she believed in me, and it gave me this desire to do this. Who does that today? This is not even part of the language of life today. If there's a young designer who really wants it, first financially, I don't know how they can manage it, but it's, she was able to do that, and now things have just escalated into this kind of crazy world.
I am curious, what she loved to work, and she did, as you said, have this generosity with professionally. Did she have that generosity personally?
I was very fortunate because I don't think she was a very good mother, but she was a great grandmother. We had a wonderful time together.
My heart broke a little I can't remember which one it was.
My father.
Yes. I'm doing well in the Foreign Service, Mom.
Yeah.
Pay attention.
Yeah. But, my family didn't really have much of a family thing, because he, on the same time, never attended one of her 16 openings at the Met. So they both sort of lived their own separate lives in a way that worked for them at that point. But in my life, she was always interested. She was always encouraging. She was always supportive of what I wanted to do and interested in what I was wanting to do. In the same way as you sort of see people talking to young kids because they want to understand what kids are interested in, what young kids are reading, what young kids are listening to, what are they doing with their time. That kind of passion she really had, and so I was, fortunate to benefit from that.
I want to sort of jump to the conversations that she had in the storytelling where the facts were a little sketchy. I mean, in many ways, she seemed to anticipate the moment that we're in now, where facts have gotten a little sketchy. And the idea of artifice, and I mean, and I'm wondering, do you have a sense of how she might sort of respond to this moment of sort of artifice being fact?
I mean, I don't, I don't think that she really cared how factual things were. I mean, you could really see that at the Costume Institute. There was a kind of sort of committee, a group of people who'd been there for a long time, who were very, very hard-assed in terms of how everything should be done and how the accuracy of every piece and moment and historical reference and that kind of thing. And she just had a whole different vision of it. And so it's not as if she was pursuing something to be factual. And even when she talks about things, she sort of smirks and laughs and smiles and sort of snickers. And so you can sort of tell that she sort of has a loose approach towards it and is not pontificating on the accuracy, then you're sort of saying bullshit. You know, it's not that. She's saying, I don't know if it's really true, but the way I like to see it is that this is my way of seeing it. And, you know, I mean, clearly, you know, whether that airplane flew over Brewster or not, you know, it doesn't look like it's a direct line for, you know, if you're leaving Kennedy Airport and heading to Europe, you don't go upstate New York on the way. Kind of thing. But I think that that's the way she could sort of communicate the vision she had for something, which I think is sort of like the key thing is how do you, because one of the things what's interesting for me was that when she went to Vogue, she didn't take the team from Harper's Bazaar and bring them to Vogue. She kept the team intact. I mean, she added new, younger photographers along the way over the years, but she didn't do what happens so much today is a new head comes in and the next thing they do is they fire everybody and they bring their people from the last job to where they're at. She didn't do that. So all of a sudden she was able to transform the magazine with the same existing team. And that's really where these stories come in, because she was able to expand their vision in terms of what could be done, and they sort of grew into those roles because she didn't go to the photo shoots. And there's, you know, today there's all these stories of like, you know, the headquarters in Vogue is looking in real time at those images and saying, I don't think we have the picture yet, and that kind of stuff. That wasn't the case all those years ago. They would come back and say, this is what we shot, and it was either we can use it or we can't use it.
You know, I think she just was trying to do she was storytelling, and she had a chance to do the storytelling in different places. And I think that when she arrived to the Costume Institute, she all of a sudden had this, it was a three-dimensional story that she could finally tell. And that's probably where she was the most, you know, faction was a very big part of the story there, but she wanted people to get the sense of what it was like during those times, and she did anything she could to create that. And historically, it was not correct. It wasn't, but people got the feeling. It was a sense of, you know, of the little girl uptown being able to understand it just as much as a woman on Park Avenue, that's not how people think. It's an elitist world out there. If you go into the Costume Institute today, that's not what it's about.
Yeah. I mean, she seemed like, despite all of the artifice and the rarefied experiences, she seemed so much a humanist, so interested in the emotions that people would have as they walked through the Costume Institute, or as they flipped through the pages of Vogue or the pages of Bazaar. I mean, would you say that, the big question, or I think it was one of the talk show hosts who raises the question, that Americans not only do not have a sense of style, but don't care about style. Do you think that it has changed since her era, that they at least care about style?
Well, you know what, to prepare for this, we went to see The Devil Wears Prada 2 last night, and And as I said to our daughter, who was the girl reading, Olivia reading the Why Don't Yous, said, please do not date somebody that wears only athletic clothes, okay? Because that's the new generation of young men out there. But what is style, though? That's the thing. Style can be defined in many different ways, and I think it's about being yourself and knowing and there are a lot of people who just don't know who they are, and style changes through the ages as well, and through different times in your life, but it's about being comfortable and sure of yourself and many other things.
I've always felt that she would adapt very well to the modern times. I've never felt that her, I think she sort of understood the times and the moment very effectively during her whole career in life.
She saw the rising impact of skateboarding.
Yes.
And bikinis. I mean, and
many other things.
Music. And I mean, there's just tons of things. And so I think that to sort of think of like all of that skill was really worked in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s and 80s, but would not work today is sort of BS. I think that she did have the ability to understand what was going on at this time, and would be able to understand what's going on this time. And I think that, so I don't think that, she happened to come along at the right moment, and at another moment she would have been useless. I don't think that. Yeah. I think that she would get it, and she would understand it, and she'd find a way to do it. But I think that to talk a second about, Anna Wintour, my grandmother wasn't political. She didn't understand how to sort of strategically handle the fact that Alexander Lieberman was gunning for her and figure out a way around that to survive. She was not that kind of person. She was just doing her thing, and when the axe fell, and that was sort of like really shocking. But there are a lot of people who are sort of survivors and political animals and sort of figure out how to do it. And you even can see that in Devil Wears Prada too. There's sort of like, who we're going to have to climb into bed with to survive another round of cuts or whatever it is. She wasn't.
Is this the right billionaire?
She wasn't that kind of, like, she didn't think that way. She just did her thing, and if the music stopped, she'd readapt and figure out something else to do. But she didn't sort of like, butcher people and play all kinds of political games and try to buy the company. That's not who she was. She didn't have that, like, that was not a bone in her body. She just wanted to do her thing. Just leave me alone, let me do my thing.
Before we let you guys have your say, that leads me to what was going to be probably my last question, which is, as you both sort of look back, what do you think might have been her greatest weakness? Was it not being political?
I think career-wise, no, because it just wasn't a part of the game back then. It really wasn't. Her career, she did what she wanted. My gosh, it's amazing that she had that freedom to do that, because she just was so curious that she just kept, and because don't forget, she had the success of this book Allure, that was a collection of her favorite images in the world, that today is still considered like one of the most important books of imagery. And I would think probably Reed was the only man in her life who she ever had a relationship with. I mean, I would think that maybe she should have shown more love to her sons. I don't think I'm not thinking in a professional level, because I can't think of a career like that there was something that she could have done that would have changed it. She rode the wave at Vogue, because Vogue, then also fashion in the 70s, it was like very different feeling. I mean, she did it. She was there at the hottest time.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's my thought. It's more of a personal, maybe side of it that I feel could be different. What do you think, Alexander?
I mean, on a sort of looking at her life, I wish that she'd been able to communicate more with women in terms of how they could do it too in a sort of a larger basis. Because I think that when she sort of like gets all uncomfortable about feminism, there was a kind of a moment there in that period in the 70s and 80s where women who had sort of like crossed a certain barrier at level of success just saw it as being sort of normal and didn't really see that there are certain steps that they could point out to help other people achieve it as well. And I think there was a kind of sense that for her, you had to sort of succeed in all areas, and it just had to happen that way. But you could not look at success in your career and then not also have a family and have a home and be able to entertain at home. So she wanted it all, kind of stuff. But I don't think that she really spoke about that or really helped other people see a blueprint, which I think she really did have a lot to share in that area, but she never, verbalized it or thought about it in a kind of way that could have helped
In
other
an
people.
instructive way.
Yeah, exactly.
I now turn to you to see if you have any questions that you might like to pose. And please don't be shy. We're an intimate group.
If anyone has a question, I can bring the microphone to you.
So all of the pictures I've ever seen of her, she's just wearing gorgeous, chunky, beautiful jewelry. I know that there was a Sotheby's, I've looked at the Sotheby's catalog, but is there an archive or a collection somewhere? Did the Costume Institute keep some of her clothing, some of her jewelry?
I think that she sold sort of privately some of the jewelry in her later years, probably to pay bills and keep things going and that kind of stuff. And so they have reappeared. There was sort of a very famous Bulgari necklace that there's all kinds of great stories about how some dealer in Rome was able to get a hold of it, and then he took years to sell it, and it was a whole sort of intriguing stories about them. And I don't remember where the cuffs went off to. Do you remember
The Kenny Lane?
Well, they were actually the two elephant tusk cuffs.
There's some things that also
Different
just
things.
disappeared. Her son sold things, and they're not in the family.
Yeah, they've all sort of disappeared. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
Anything else? Well, I wanted to thank the Library of Congress for inviting us
Yes.
here. Thank you very, very much. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Andrew, for organizing everything.
And can I ask one more question
Yes.
before you wrap it up? Of all of the bon mots that she uttered, why did you decide on the eye has to travel?
That's another very good question, because I was looking at Allure, and she wrote it in the introduction, and all of a sudden it just clicked, because it's about the eye and the mind. It sounded so much like her, because it's this sense of this voyage that we're going to go off on, and I think it works. I think it really, really works, and so
It's a wonderful title.
It's her. They're her words. I mean, I think that's what's nice about making movies like this is that you have the archives, you have the words. We had original recordings from between George Plimpton and Deanna Vreeland, because they would meet for cocktails at our apartment, and usually the microphone was very, very far away from them, and there was a lot of ice. Okay, sound of ice and cocktails, and some wild stories that, we wanted to. They were just crazy, crazy stories that, and I kept thinking, I was like, my gosh, how can we make these come to life? And so part of those tapes made it into her autobiography, DV, which if you haven't read it, you should,
wonderful.
because it's really, really incredible. But thank you very, very much for coming, and thank you again to the Library of Congress for thinking of us and thinking of her, most importantly.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Oh.
Absolutely amazing what you've done for Diana Vreeland, but for her family, for her children and her grandchildren, their great-grandchildren, to be able to see this. I know there's the whole world of fashion, but this is beautiful, beautiful.
No, thank you.
piece
Well,
of work.
she's the
Well,
star. She was
absolutely, but you brought it all together.
Yes.
And I really salute you.
Oh, thank you. Well, listen, we had a good subject there.